Well, I hope you are able to see the word file and you are able to see me as well. It's clear.
Yes, sir.
Well, okay. So today we are going to discuss about the social condition during Peshwa's period. And in traditional Hindu family, caste is a very important social factor. Caste, it surrounds, it get mixed up with the economic factor, but nevertheless, caste has remained a very important factor, and even still today, in spite of its apparent drawback, which keeps the society divided. Well, now when we discuss about the Peshwa's period, during the period of Rajaram, that is just before Peshwa's period, the Vatan system was kind of revived. Chhatrapati Shivaji, he has tried to do away with the Vatan, but because of the peculiar condition as the Maharashtra was invaded and the whole administrative structure collapsed, in order to attract the Maratha Sardar to the cause of Swarajya, to fight against the invading Mughal, Rajaram has revived the system of Vatan. Now we see that with this revival of the system of Vatan, the Marathas, it attracted the Marathas, but this Vatan became one of the important cause of the conflict among the Marathas. They started desiring more and more watan, and for that they started fighting. Even they started fighting among themselves as well. And now the caste or any identity becomes an important factor where people try to get together in order to monopolize the economic resources. It happens in surrounding caste, it happens surrounding religion as well. Under the name of the caste or under the name of the religion, people get together so that they can monopolize the resources, they can bargain in a better term, they can have power, they can have more strength. And that is what we see happen in relation to the caste and Vatan. As there was a revival of Vatan during the period of Rajaram, the caste conflict became more intense because now the Brahmins, they got together and they became a kind of force that they will cooperate with each other, and when Marathas, they join hands together against the Brahmin. So these two major castes, that is the Brahmin and Marathas, there seems to be a kind of conflict between these two with the decline of the Mughal, and Vatan have intensified this conflict. Caste conflict is there. It was inherited. It's always there. People belonging to one particular caste think that they are superior and different than the people of other caste. But this desire for Vatan has intensified this conflict. However, it is not that always these Marathas and Brahmins were fighting. They did cooperate, no doubt. For example, Bajirao Peshwa was Brahmin, but he brought forward the Sardar like Shinde, who were Marathas. He brought forward the Sardar like Pawar, who were again Marathas. He brought forward the people like Holkar, who was Dhangar by caste. But that somewhere in the subconscious mind of the people, that I am a Brahmin and I am separate than the Marathas, and these Marathas are my competitor. If not enemy, at least they are my competitor for the Vatan. That conflict is very prevalent during the days of Peshwa. Like nowadays also we see that there is a kind of if not enmity, but there is a kind of consciousness of the conflict that we are coming in the reserve category, we are not coming in the unreserved category. And the main reason behind this is that the benefits that come from the if you are belonging to a particular category, and it is due to the reason of that benefit, people stick together, they bargain so that they can bargain. So your mind becomes an agency to speak certain thing that benefits you, and you protect it as a kind of value system. Well, it is a very complex issue, very complex issue. So let us go back to the time of Peshwa again. Uh, the caste was definitely one of the important regulating factor in the society. There were quite strict caste rule which were inherited from the tradition, and for breaking of the caste rule, people were punished. And there used to be the group like Goth Sabha, Jati Sabha, and they had their own panchayat. And if somebody break the caste rule, for example, marriages are believed to take place within the caste. If somebody breaks that rule, panchayat will sit and decide what is to be done. That caste panchayat will sit. Mm, If somebody eats a food that is forbidden, then definitely that the people panchayat of that caste who are considered to be respectable people, they will sit, and what step should be taken, that will be decided. And this caste factor was very prevalent. It had a lot of influence. For example, take the case of Bajirao Peshwa. the first Bajirao Peshwa. Bajirao, he had his lover as a Muslim woman, Mastani. And the Brahmins of Pune, who had a very significant hold on the social behavior, did not like that, he should spend such a long time with her, or, eat the food that is non-vegetarian food, or drink liquor, which is forbidden for the Brahmin, generally speaking. And they just put a blame on that lady, that it's because of her influence that Bajirao, who is Brahmin, has is doing something that is forbidden by the caste rule. Abhaksha, abhaksha is something that is not to be eaten, that is a forbidden food. And they decided that we will not do any rituals in the Brahmin community of Pune, will not do any rituals in the house of Peshwa, as he is keeping this Muslim lady in Shaniwarwada itself, and doing all these things that is forbidden by the caste rule. And as a result, consequences, the Peshwas were not getting any Brahmin priest to perform the ritual puja in their house. And one Brahmin has done that. One Brahmin has looked and performed the puja and rituals for the Peshwa. And the Brahmins of Pune were so strict and so violent, that Brahmin was stoned to death by this Brahmin. He was killed. So you can understand that the Peshwa, who was, and the Bajirao Peshwa was having the very well-known name all over India at that time, being a very, very efficient cavalry commander. He even went to the extent of coming very close to Delhi and frighten the Mughals. If that is the condition of the person who is holding a lot of military and political power in his hand, you can understand the condition of the common people. So there was always fear in the mind of the person that I should not break the caste rule, otherwise I will be outcasted. And if somebody is outcasted, that is considered as a greatly insulting factor. If you remember, we have studied about the social history, Emil Durkheim, in the second semester. And here we have discussed how the social rule works. They are invisible till the time you follow it, but they suddenly become very vocal if you break it. So, for example, Bajirao Peshwa, if had he remained within the confinement of his caste rule, probably nobody would have talked about the caste rule. But the moment he break them, he became the target, and the caste rule became very, very vocal. Well, now, though the caste rule, certain caste rule had been, to be followed, like about the food rule and about the marriage alliances and so on. But there are certain caste rules which had been put on the back burner over a period of time. And for example, that is the duties to be performed. Traditionally speaking, the duties of the Brahmin is, to learn, to study scriptures, and to give knowledge to the people. But we see that the Brahmin like Bajirao Peshwa becoming a very efficient cavalry commander and leading the army. And that is true about the many Brahmin of that period. They increasingly took to the different profession. And for that profession, they were not condemned. They will not perform their own duties of doing puja, but they will hire a Brahmin to do it for them, and they themselves will go for a war, or many of the Brahmins have become money lender also, businessmen. Many of the Brahmins, they took to the cultivation as well, but that did not lead to the loss of caste as such. So mm, uh, caste rules, depending on the situation, it became rigid or flexible. And not only Brahmin, there were many number of castes who took to the Shatra Dharma. Shatra Dharma is fighting the war, and that is generally legacy of this Mughal invasion. When Mughal invaded Maharashtra, and after the killing of Sambhaji by Aurangzeb, the war became people's war, and everybody, irrespective of their caste, they started picking up sword and fighting, and it was accepted. Generally in Smriti literature, that is a traditional literature of the Hindus, which describes the particular rules of the caste rules. It is believed that there is an dharma in the normal time, and there is an apad dharma, that is dharma at the time of the crisis. So invasion of Maharashtra by the Mughal, it was a kind of apad dharma, the critical situation, and at the critical situation your dharma may change. So traditionally speaking, because of this invasion, large number of people across the caste, they took to the Shatra Dharma. They acquired the Dharma of Kshatriya, that is fighting the war. So, we find the Brahmin and Kunbi, who are traditional cultivator, and Mahar, who is supposed to be untouchable, and Dhangar, which is a kind of nomadic tribe who go around with their ships. They all took to the fighting, and they became in due course. They became good fighter, and in due course they became commanders, and they started behaving like a Kshatriya ruler. Well. Now, caste conflict, as I already told you, the caste conflict has also simmering. It was there in the mind of the people. Sometimes it resurfaced very, very strictly because Chhatrapati was Maratha and the Peshwa was Brahmin. Now, as you know, we have already discussed this. Shahu, he did not went to fight the war after in the initial phase. He did fight the war, but later on he used to remain confined to Satara and delegated most of the responsibility of fighting and extending the empire to Peshwa. Though Shahu and Peshwa, they were in good relation with each other, there were certain Marathas who felt antagonized, and they believed that the Maratha Chhatrapati is being sidelined by the Brahmin Peshwa. And that is the reason we find that many Maratha Sardar, they were not willing to take orders from Peshwa. For example, Dabhade of Gujarat and Bhosle of Nagpur, and that led to the conflict. Similarly, it was not a very simple conflict between the Marathas and the Brahmin. Within the Brahmins also, there were different groups which we'll be discussing. Similarly, there was one major conflict between the two castes. One is that is Brahmin and Maratha, and another was Brahmin and Prabhu. There is a caste called Prabhu who also claimed to be the equal status of the Brahmins, and there was a competition between these two, which is superior. Prabhu also claimed that like Brahmins, they also have a right to Upanayana, that is, thread ceremony, which is done by the Brahmin. We'll be talking about the ceremony later on, and study the Veda. Prabhu also claimed that they also do the same, and if you remember, in the fort administration, the Karkhanis, the in charge of the store and the fort used to be Prabhu, and the Brahmin used to be an accountant. So, these two castes had a traditionally enmity and antagonism among themselves, which Shivaji has used to the best of his advantage, so that nobody can betray and join hands with the enemy. Because if a Brahmin accountant is joining hands with the enemy, Prabhu Karkhanis will report it to Chhatrapati Shivaji. And during the time of Peshwa, these two castes, in order to monopolize the position, there were a number of Prabhus employed in the Peshwa administration. In order to monopolize more and more power, they also formed the group, and the conflict, it seems to be, became more intense between these two castes. Narayan Rao Peshwa, the last Peshwa, he gave, he gave verdict in favor of the Brahmins later on when the conflict reached to his court. As the Peshwas were Brahmin, traditionally in the Hindu society, Brahmins were generally considered as at the pinnacle of the Varnashrama system, and they had a lot of influence on the society, no doubt about it. But nevertheless, it was occasionally contested. But as the Peshwa became powerful and they were Brahmin, the status of the Brahmin under the Peshwa's rule has definitely increased. The Brahmins increasingly took to the politics and war, and we find that under Peshwa, the number of Brahmin Watandar have increased, especially during the latter phase, that is the phase of Savai Madhavrao and Narayan Rao. Within the Brahmin community, there were different groups, and they also had their own conflict in order to increase their power in the court or to monopolize the important posts. Like there were Deshastha Brahmin, who were originally belonged to the area called Desh. Now, Desh is an area which is generally believed to be the area of the Western Ghat surrounding Pune, Satara, Kolhapur. And then there were Kokanastha Brahmin, who originally came from the Konkan region, that is the coastal strip between the seashore and the Western Ghat. Then there were Karade Brahmin, there were Saraswat Brahmin, there were Agnihotri Brahmin, and all these Brahmin claimed to be superior than the other Brahmin, leading to the lot of conflict, lot of antagonism among themselves, and unfortunately, that is a loss of time and energy. Peshwe were Kokanastha, and among the Kokanastha, they were Chitpavan Brahmin. So we find that it is believed that because of they being Kokanastha, they promoted Kokanastha, but we don't see that very obviously. There were a number of Deshastha Brahmin who played a very important role in the administration of the Peshwas. Well, And Pratinidhi, Sripatrao Pratinidhi, one of the important person who was holding the important post of Pratinidhi during the period of Shahu, he was Deshastha Brahmin. And in 1720, when the first Peshwa, Balaji Vishwanath Bhatt, when he dies, there was a conflict in the Darbar, next Peshwa, who should become next Peshwa. And there were many supporters of Bajirao, the son of Balaji Vishwanath. But Sripat Rao, he was Deshastha. He opposed that this young boy of 20 years should not be made Peshwa. He is impassioned and he is over ambitious. He is not capable. I am more matured, and there were a number of people who supported him. So here we see in the court there was a division. Many Deshastha Brahmin they joined hands with Sripat Rao Pratinidhi, and many Kokanastha they came in support of Baji Rao. Finally, we know the history. Shahu has decided in favor of Baji Rao. Well, there used to be also conflict for the bhikshuki. Bhikshuki is alms, that is you give donation to the Brahmin. So the Brahmins, in order to avoid conflict, they have divided certain area. In this area, I will go and beg for the alms, and in that area, you go and demand alms from the people. That is, donation. For that also there used to be conflict. The Deshastha used to claim that this is our area, and Kokanastha they started, encroaching on them. And Deshastha did had a feeling that this Pune, Satara, we are the original resident of these people, this area, and Kokanastha they came from Konkan, and now they are monopolizing the power. They are becoming Peshwa. So that kind of simmering conflict was always prevalent in that Brahmin community as well. Talking about Marathas, the Marathas, starting from Chhatrapati Shivaji onwards, they started claiming Kshatriya status, and out of that Marathas, there are 96 Kula. Kula means lineage. Kula means traditionally family lineage. So there were 96 families identified among the Marathas who claim Kshatriya status. And it is believed that this Maratha community, in fact, has emerged from the Kunbi community of Maharashtra. Kunbis were generally agriculture cultivators, and the Marathas, over a period of time, who got chance to become a military commander, they started claiming Kshatriya status. Like Shahaji, Shivaji's father was a military commander, and then later on, as his son became independent king, they started claiming Kshatriya status. Kunbi were generally farmer, agricultural labor. Sometimes the slave person is also referred as Kunbi, and the woman slave is also referred as Kunbin. We get what kind of social structure we get. There is a bit of ambiguities definitely, but we need to try to understand whatever we could about the society as it was functioning under Peshwa's rule. Apart from this, three important community, that is Brahmin, Prabhu, Maratha, Kunbi. There were a number of other castes. Like the whole Hindu society is divided into the castes and subcastes, like Kumbhar, Sonar, Sutar. Kumbhar is a person who make earthen pot. Sonar is a goldsmith. Sutar is a person like who works with the wood, a carpenter. Shimpi is a tailor. Dhangar is a person who used to go around with the sheep. Teli is a person who used to sell the oil. Navi is a barber. Mari is a gardener. Then Gondhari used to be the one caste who used to sing the song of the god. Then Gurau is the person who look after the cattle. So this caste, they had certain economic function in the villages, and due to this economic function, this caste also came to be known as Balutedar. We will be talking about Balutedar. The Balutedar were the people who used to stay in villages. Later on, of course, there had been a migration and cross migration, no doubt about it. But this Balutedar used to do the different duties required for the maintenance of the village economy. For example, Sutar was a Balutedar who used to provide the implements, wooden implement that is required for the cultivation. Mari is a person who used to cultivate the flower garden. So they came to be known as Balutedar, who played an important economic function in relation to their caste in the village. Kumbhar is a person who made earthen pot. Well, so these caste, different castes, they had different branches as well. And these different branches also had conflict among themselves. For example, in Shimpi caste, there were Namdev Shimpi and Bhavsar Shimpi. For example, in Brahmin caste, we already studied how Deshastha and Kokanastha and Chitpavan and Karade and Saraswat, all that were considering themselves as a superior than the other Brahmin and leading to the conflict. Similarly, within each caste, there were subcastes. For example, I'm just giving two examples. In Shimpi, there were Namdev Shimpi and Bhausar Shimpi, and both of them used to consider other Shimpi as inferior to them. Similarly, among the Dhangar, there used to be Hatkar and Putkar. Hatkar was the people, Hatkar used to be the people who will go around with the sheep, lead a kind of nomadic life. Putkar were the stable people who will weave the blankets from the wool of the sheep and sell it in the market. Here also again the conflict was there for the claiming of the superior position. Then apart from that, there was a community called untouchables, Asprusha. They are also known as Atishudra, and in the Atishudra community we find that there are Mahar, Mang and Chambhar mainly. So Mahar was also important balutedar in the village. He played an important economic function, like tracking of the thews, keeping watch over the villages, cleaning of the village, taking the revenue to the government, and arranging saran. Saran is the wood that is arranged for the burning of the dead bodies. So all that was the responsibility of Mar. So we see here the caste and economic function in case of Balutedari got merged together. And then among the Mahar, there were a number of subcastes as well, like we have in case of Brahmin and in case of Shimpi, and that is called Pot Jati. Jati is a word used for the caste, and Pot Jati is a word which is used for the subcaste. So we have different Pot Jati, that is different subcastes among the Mahar, like Somanshi, Ladwan, Baune, Vinkar, and then another untouchable caste was Mang. Among the Mang also, there were different subcastes, like Ghodke was the Mang, untouchable, but he used to look after the horses. There was Duffade, who used to make the duff. Duff is a musical instrument made up of the skin of the animal. Then there was there was a caste community called within the Mang, that is Mang Garudi. Mang Garudi is a person who used to work as a snake charmer. He will take his snake around and, play that musical instrument. Then there was another untouchable caste called Chambhar. Chambhar also had a different subcaste. Chambhar, the main job of Chambhar was to make the different product from the animal skin. So within the Chambhar, there were different subcastes like Dhor. Dhor community prepared the moat. The moat used to be the kind of water. It was used to pull the water from the well so that the agriculture land can be irrigated. The huge kind of basket made up of skin of animal, which is prepared by this dhor, and that is put in the well, and that is pulled with the help of the bullocks. So that is called moat. Earlier, it was used for the agriculture cultivation. So preparation of the moat was done by Dhor. Mochi, he prepared and repaired the footwear. And then there was a subcaste within the Chambar called Timgar, who prepared saddle for the horses, which is called Fogir in Marathi. So, all this caste, there was a conflict within the subcaste also, there was a conflict. And there was a conflict related to the very small matter within the different castes. For example, a Mahar groom can ride horse at the time of the marriage, but the Mang groom cannot ride a horse. He has to ride a bull at the time of the marriage. And, whenever there is a force and wherever there is a power monopolization, it is resisted. That is the common human psychology. So Mang used to also Mang groom also used to claim that he can also ride the horse, and that led to the conflict between Mahar and Mang. Similarly, who will take the dead body of the animal? The Mahar used to claim that that is his traditional right. He will cut that carcass of the dead animal and take the skin. But the Mang used to claim, that is his right, and there used to be a fight to who will take the carcass of the dead animal. Then there used to be conflict related to Watan. For example, all these people, the goldsmith, the Mahar, the person who makes earthen pot, they all are called Watandar of the village, Watandar of a particular area. And related to Watan also, there used to be sometimes a conflict. For example, if a Watandar Mahar dies of a particular village, and if he is having two sons, one son will claim that this is my Watan, and another son will contest for that, and there will be conflict for Watan as well. Similarly, if there is a goldsmith and if he leaves village for maybe due to drought or maybe foreign invasion, he goes and stays at some other place for a few years. Somebody else will come and start doing the work of the goldsmith in the village, and the earlier goldsmith will come back and start claiming that this is his watan. It is his traditional hereditary right, and there will be conflict which has to be resolved by the village. The person, I'll later on tell you also, Mirasdar and Upre, but the person who traditionally had the right about the Watandari of the village was known as Mirasdar. And person who came later on was known as Upre. For example, the earlier example of goldsmith I give, the person who was already there in the village, traditionally his forefathers had been doing the work of goldsmith in the village, he is known as Mirasdar. But the person who came later on is known as Upre. Well, now, all this conflict related to Watan, who will inherit the Watan, is generally resolved by the Goth Sabha. That is a panchayat, kind of panchayat form in the village of the respectable people, which generally we have already discussed about the judicial system of the Marathas. Like, the party will be there, Kulkarni will be there, and there will be some more respectable person. And they will try to resolve. If not, they will further take it to the district level or to the provincial level or to the government finally, central government at Pune. Well, and now what was Goth Sabha? Goth Sabha is an assembly of respectable member of the particular. There were a different type of Goth Sabha. There were Goth Sabha at the village level, which will be having a people across the caste. There will be a caste Goth Sabha, which is known as Jati Sabha. So here the people within that caste, but there will be member of all the subcaste, and they decided the caste, and if the matter is not resolved, that will be taken to the government. Watan, economy and caste. Watan was all the traditional hereditary and professional right, which I have already explained. Everybody in that village had a traditionally hereditary right, was known as Watandar. So cobbler is also Watandar, Mahar is also Watandar, Patil is also Watandar, Kulkarni is also Watandar, because all of them were the part of the whole ecological system of the village, having a traditional hereditary right, which is passed on from generation to generation. The caste was integrated with the division of labor. For example, Patil was generally Maratha and his duty was to protection of the village. So, there were certain duties assigned to the particular caste and they become a part of the economic system. He has to deliver justice and he had certain traditional rights. Some land was given to him. Also, he can take certain produce from the village agricultural land, which we have already discussed while discussing about the administration of the Peshwas. Then there was a Brahmin there was a Kulkarni who used to keep the account and he was a Brahmin. Again, similar to Patil, he had some traditional rights. So I'm not going to elaborate it once again as we have already discussed this. Then another important community in the village was farmer who were generally Kunbi and Mari. Then there were, apart from these three people, there were Balutedar now. In fact, the Patil and Kulkarni, they also form the part of the Balutedari system, but they are generally, because of their higher caste and higher status, they are referred as different people. And apart from them, there were generally 12 Balutedar. And these Balutedar were also known as Karu. And Balutedar were essential for the survival of the farmer. The whole economy was surrounded around the farming sector. Agriculture was the main basis on which the whole economical structure based. So these people, they were essential for the life of the farmer. This I think I have already referred earlier, but I will still tell you, like there were Chaugule, Mahar, Sutar. Chaugule was a person, if you remember, was a person who carried the account book. Mahar, and explained number of times. Sutar is a carpenter. Lohar is a blacksmith. Sambar is a cobbler or who work with the skin of the animal. Kumbar is a earthen pot maker. Navi is a barber. Sonar is a goldsmith. Joshi is a person who perform the rituals. Parit is a washerman. Gurav is a person who look after the cattle, and Koi is a person who caught fish. So all these people were considered important for the survival of the farmer, and they are considered as a balutedar, or they are also called karu. Remember, you will get a short kind of questions. So there might be question like among these people who was not part of Balutedar, or among these people who were not part of Karu? That kind of questions you generally get. Or what was the number of Balutedar in general? And then apart from that, there were some more people who function in the village, but their work was not very essential for the survival of the farmer, and they were generally referred as alutedar, and they were also called naru. For example, among this naru community, we have Teli, Tamboli, Sai, Dhangar, Shimpi, Mari, then Gondhari, Bhat, Gosavi, and Bhoi. Teli is a person who sold oil. Now, we are just trying to understand it, and this most of the things are generally written based on the oral sources. It is quite possible that sometimes Teli is referred as Balutedar. Here, in the book Khare and Kulkarni, Teli is coming under the category of Naru, but oil is essential. So we find that there is a bit of fluctuation. Sometimes the person who is Alutedar is referred as Balutedar. Generally, that kind of little bit of flexibility depending on the situation we have to take into consideration. But nevertheless, among the Alutedar who are not considered as essential for the survival of the farmer, where Teli, Tamboi is a caste. I'm not sure what profession they did for, perform. Then there was a Sai. Dhangar, I already told you, they were the people who went around who look after the cattle. Shimpi was a tailor. Mari was a gardener. Then Gondhari was a person who used to sing the devotional song. And then Bhat also had a similar profession, going from one place to another place and singing the song. Gosavi was, the generally who went around begging for the alms. Then Bhoi. Now we have these two different words. Koi is a generally person who caught fish. Bhoi is also person who generally caught fish. But what is the difference between these two? I am also not sure. But Bhoi is referred as Alutedar and Koi is referred as Balutedar. Well, now, this system was a bit flexible because this is a traditionally how the, this is traditionally how the Hindu social structure in the village it worked. But with the coming of the Islam,
Sir,
hello.
sir, sir,
Ah,
maybe for a sir, like we eat two types of fish, na? There's river and there's sea.
okay.
So I guess वही फर्क हो सकता है और so I don't see any other reason for differentiating them.
Well, okay. It's quite probable, but yeah, you may be right. Like for example, somebody who is catching fish on the in the Konkan region from the sea, he is referred as koi. And generally, the person who is catching fish in the river in the interior of the geographical region, he is referred as bhoi. Because I remember when I was a kid, generally the people who caught fishes, they are referred as bhoi because we are staying in Vidarbha, far away from the seashore. So you could be right. I'm not sure about it. Well, now with the coming of the Islam, the Muslim population also became a part of sometimes village, and though the Muslim generally they remain in the urban area, but sometimes they also became part of the village. And Fakir was later on included in the group in the list of Alutedar because with the coming of the Islam, Fakir also became part of the society. Now all these watandar, different watandar, all these were categorized as watandar. Alutedar and Balutedar both were coming under the category of watandar. Now all these watandar, they will get agriculture produce from the farmer, and agricultural land is referred as Kari. Kari is black. The soil generally black, and so they will get certain produce from the Kari, that is from the black, that means from agriculture, and they will get certain income from the Pandri, that is white. And what is white? White is a space for dwelling in the village. So in the village, land is divided into the two parts, Kari and Pandri, that is black and white. So black is agriculture land and white is a land of village settlement where there are houses and where there is a market. So you understand these differences, Kari and Pandri, and all these Balutedar, they got certain income from Kari and Pandri, that is from the black and white both. So all these duties and traditional rights were hereditary, but there was conflict about succession. And now I'll tell you about these two words related to the economy and caste system as well. Now, please remember this when we'll be discussing about the economic situation, there will be a lot of overlapping. and I may be just bypassing those words by just referring it. Mirazdar, as I already told you, the Mirazdar were the people who either had traditional land in the village or who were traditional Watandar of that particular village. And Upre were the people who came to village for either for the cultivation or to fill the gap because the Watandar of that particular village has left. Or they will just come and start doing their business to attract the people. So these people who were not traditional hereditary Watandar, they were known as Upre. That goes to in relation to the land holding as well as that goes to in relation to the other Watandari hereditary profession as well. Well, now apart from this group in the village, there were Firaste in village and Firaste were in town as well, who did not remain stable at one place, but they used to carry the goods that is required for the farmer as well as to entertain them. For example, Vaidu. Vaidu was a kind of doctor, Ayurvedic doctor, and he generally will go from village to village and seeing if the people are sick and giving them medicine and taking money or something in return. Then there was a Kolati. Kolati is a person who will entertain the people. You know, that is a traditional caste of Kolati who are nomadic people, and they will entertain the people by like circus. In circus, we have they perform the different gymnastic activities. So similarly, Kolati used to perform the different gymnastic activities. Then Makadwale is a person who will go around with a monkey, Makad. Nandi Bailwale who will go around with a Nandi, the huge bull, and entertain the people. Then Bahirupi. Bahirupi is a person who will go around by disguise as a in a different shape, sometimes as a king and sometimes as a priest, and he will entertain the people. And then there were Gosavi who also did not stay stable at one place but went from one place to another places begging for the alms. Now, apart from this traditional division of the Hindu society in the village into Bara Balutedar and then Mirazdar and Upre and Firaste Alutedar, there were also Jain people who were not part of the Hindu community, but there apparently it was very difficult to distinguish them as separate from Hindus. They generally remain mostly as a shopkeeper, and they were also accepted as a part of the society. Now, another important thing when we discuss about the society of the contemporary period, about the issue of conversion. When Islam came to India and became victorious, large number of people were converted to Islam. Now, very important question that has hassled the people in the medieval period and now also, if a person, by and large, the population was termed as Hindu, if a Hindu person becomes Muslim or Christian, can he be converted back to Hinduism? Because a very important thing is that in Hinduism, there is no system of conversion as such, because Hinduism is a religion which has evolved very gradually. So somebody has to be born as Hindu or somebody. It was a very difficult question to address with. And if we study the examples, we find that the response of the society was not uniform. In certain cases, the people are reconverted back to Hinduism if somebody has become Muslim due to situation or due to force to save his life. And if he wants to reconvert it back, the puja was performed and there was a Shuddhi Kriya, that is nothing but puja that was performed. The Brahmins, and then Brahmins declared him to become a purified, and that person is accepted back in the fold of the Hinduism in the subcaste, and the people belonging to his caste will share food with him, and that is considered as a purity rituals. And but in certain cases that is denied to the person. People took a stand that no, once you became Muslim and you stayed with Muslim or you stayed with Christian, you cannot come back to Hinduism. So it generally depended on the position of the people and the support of the ruler. We have certain cases under Holkar, certain cases under Peshwas, and we don't get a very uniform kind of information or very uniform kind of practices about the issue of conversion. Well, another important factor about the contemporary society is samskara, and some of the samskara still continues. And among the Hindus, Hindu life of a Hindu man should be given 16 samskaras, 16 impressions or the 16 important rituals from his birth to death. For example, Barse, Barse was an important sanskar on which is namakaran, that is a name is given to the child. Then Zawde means that child is trounced, his head is trounced, the hair is shaved off. That is considered as one of the important sanskara. Then Vratabandha is Janev. In the ancient time when the child used to go to his teacher's ashrama for learning, he was given that Upanayana. Janev was put. Thread was put across his chest. You have seen that. You must have seen that maybe in the movies or
Yes,
somewhere.
sir.
हाँ,
Yes,
yeah.
sir. Red
हाँ,
ceremony अभी भी होती है.
अभी भी होती है generally. Yeah, very right. So
But these days it's more of a fashion than
it
to, पहले it
def-
was supposed to be the kid was supposed to be taking under Hinduism, education under Hinduism. तो करते
right.
थे, but this it's more of a fashion.
Yeah, it is more of a fashion, and it is also a kind of asserting your identity as an upper caste Hindu. So this Upanayana ceremony, which is also called Vratabandha, that kind of ceremony was done, but that was confined to the upper two castes, that is Brahmins and Kshatriya. And this next important samskara was Vivaha, that is marriage, and the last samskara was of course Mrityu. After the death also there are certain samskaras, certain rituals are to be performed with the dead bodies. And out of this samskara, many samskaras still continue. And marriage was an important samskara on which a lot of money was spent, as it is even done nowadays. Even people, they incur debt. That was the situation during those days also. It was considered as a matter of prestige to marry off your daughter with, and spending a lot of money on her marriage. Well, in the death ritual, the disposal of the dead body was done in the three different way. For example, cremation, and generally cremation is done for the higher caste. And after that, it is believed that if you die at the places of pilgrimage, places which is considered as a pure place, you ascend to the heaven. But it was not possible for everyone to go at the time of his death to the place of pilgrimage, like Kashi or Nashik and so on. So the system was that you burn the body at place where the person has died, but after that you collect his bone next day or after 2 3 days, and that bone were kept in a jar, and then later on that jar is that asthi visarjan, that asthi, that is the remains of the bone is being drowned or released in the water at the important places of pilgrimage like Kashi or at Nashik. In certain cases, there was a system of burial also, and mostly the burial was done for the lower caste. And in case of sannyasi, the people who have renounced the word, generally their dead body is, released in the water after their death, that is in the river. Well, Shraddha was an important ceremony, and a few days after the death, Shraddha was performed, and then after every year on the date of death, the Shraddha ceremony was performed, on which large huge amount of money was spent. The society was having a lot of superstitious belief. For example, Muhurta. Muhurta is an auspicious time. For every important thing, the Brahmin, they used to look through the Panchang, the text, and they used to find out the right time for the all the important thing that is called Muhurta. This is also this is the nowadays also for the important, and the Muhurta was found for the important important work, like marriage, or if you are starting a war, or if you are going on an expedition against enemy, or if you are going on journey. And for small things also Muhurta was found. There was a lot of influence of this traditional superstitious belief system. Like during the first Anglo-Maratha war, interestingly, the Maratha commander did not attack the British forces, even though his position was better, believing that this is not a right muhurta. The time is not auspicious, so we need to wait for the auspicious time. And he wasted 2 months so that the right auspicious time can be found. And it was believed that if you attack your enemy at the auspicious time, your victory is certain. Well, we have gone much, we have traveled a lot, but we can understand the mentality of that period, which in fact, that kind of superstitious mentality has proved one of the important reason of the backwardness of the community in general. Well, then there was another superstitious belief called Shakun. Shakun means you are having something auspicious happening to you when you start your journey, or when you start to start your expedition. So this first is Muhurta is an auspicious time, and Shakun is an auspicious event. For example, if you have started your journey and if a married woman crosses your path with a filled water pot, then that is considered as auspicious. Or if a cow with a calf crosses your path, then that is considered as auspicious. And many times it is done deliberately. If a big person, for example, if the Peshwa is starting for his expedition against Nizam, deliberately few married women will cross his path with the field water. That is considered as auspicious. Shakun usko bolte the. It was called Shakun. Or the cow with the calf will be sent across the street, and then later on Peshwa will cross. Nowadays also there is a Shubha Shakun and Apashakun. Shubha Shakun is a auspicious and Apashakun is something bad that is happening. For example, if you go on traveling and the cat crosses your path, that is considered as a apashakun. Many people, they still believe on that kind of belief system still. Then there is a something called Paigun. Paigun means something is an auspicious, somebody is auspicious and somebody is inauspicious. For example, if after marriage, if your economic condition becomes very good, then you say that, bahu ka Paigun bahut acha tha. Matlab kya? What does that mean is that the newly married girl that came to your house, her feet is auspicious, and in Marathi that is called paigun. That means the auspiciousness that came with the feet of a particular person. So if you are going on some good work or expedition or a war, and that person comes and meets you, and if you win the war, you develop a kind of belief system that his paigun is good. That means his feet are auspicious, as his feet has touched your house when you started for an important journey and you came out successfully. Similarly, there is an Paigun bura hona. That means the Paigun is not good. That was also done, and it is believed that if you go on some journey or some expedition, some important work, and if you see the face of that person, if he comes to meet you, probably you are doomed. Your work is not going to be carried out, and that is called Ashubha Paigun. Paigun acha nahi hai. His or her Paigun is not good, and many times that person is in a very sarcastically or in a very derogatory term, that person or that lady is referred as Kal Tondya or Kal Tondi. That is a Marathi word. Kal Tonda means the person with a black face. Actually, literally, his face is not black, or her face is not black if she is called Kal Tondi. That means if you see her face or if you see his face at the time of you are going for some important work, you are sure that your work will not be done. So that kind of superstitious belief we get reference to and society was full of that kind of belief. Even the believers, they still have believe in that kind of thing. Well. Then there is also belief of Graha Pida and Graha Shanti. Graha Pida means, you construct a house, but there is something inauspicious forces which gives you trouble. That is called Graha Pida. So you have to do Graha Shanti. That means you have to do some puja, call some Brahmins, perform some puja, pay something to them, feed them, and after that, it was believed that your house has become cool now. There is a still belief of Vastu Shanti. Many Hindus, they perform the puja of Vastu so that the house, which is considered as an entity, becomes cool and gives you also peace of mind. देन नजर लागने मीन्स किसकी नजर लग गई, हम हिंदी में बोलते हैं ना, मतलब दैट पर्सन्स द काइंड ऑफ वाइब्रेशन दैट ही सेंड्स टू यू इज नॉट गुड, एंड probably your work will not be done, or your health might be spoiled, something of that sort might happen, or you may not progress. Then there was a superstitious belief about eclipse. If the solar eclipse and lunar eclipse, those are considered as an inauspicious days, because according to the traditional Hindu belief, sun and moon were, swallowed by the demon called Rahu. And that those were considered as an inauspicious days, inauspicious moment, where generally you avoid doing any good important work, and you pay alms to the people, you give donations so that the grahana goes away. That is, the sun and moon is released from the mouth of Rahu. Then there was also system of Navas. Navas means you pray to the god that let my this work be done, and then I'll do something. I'll do some puja, or I'll donate something to a temple. That is called Navas, which is still there, prevalent in mostly in the village. Let son be born to me, and I will donate so much of money to the temple. The kind of having a business account with the god, that you give me this, let me pass IAS exam, and I'll do something for you. I'll come for pilgrimage to Pandharpur. That kind of Navas system is still there. Then Anusthan is a puja which is generally done to bring good luck and to avoid the bad luck. For example, at the time of death of Madhavrao, when Madhavrao was very sick and died, a lot of Brahmins were made to sit for Anusthana in the different temples, Nashik, Pune, and Thevur. And those Brahmins used to go on chanting the mantra in order to avoid the death or inauspicious moment of death of Madhavrao. Of course, it did not take place. Madhavrao nevertheless died. But people do believe that this Anusthana can bring you good luck or it can avoid the bad luck. Then Bhutabada. Bhutabada is a ghost. There is a belief about the ghost that somebody's health is not good or he's not behaving probably ghost has caught hold of him. And there used to be mantrik, a person who is expert in driving away the ghost. He is called mantrik. So Bhutabada was also there. Then Vrat is, you do some, you deny yourself about certain food, or you you go on fasting. That is called Vrat. And it is that kind of self torture is believed to please the god and bless you with the blessings. Brahmin worship and Dakshina was prevalent in the month of Shravana, that is one of the Hindu month, I think corresponding to mostly August of July, August of the Gregorian calendar. There was a tradition of paying a lot of Dakshina, a lot of money to the Brahmin. And during those days, earlier that was paid by Dabhade, the Senapati of Maratha. And as they have stopped it, Nana Sahib Peshwe have started it once again at Pune. And large number of Brahmin, huge number of Brahmins will descend on Pune from all over the country. And there will be Anusthana, there will be Puja, and those Brahmins will be fed for days together, and they will be paid Dakshina by the Peshwa. These Brahmin coming in the large number, they also created a lot of nuisance for the citizen of Pune. And the citizen of Pune used to go away during the month of Shravana, many of them, so that they can avoid this Brahmin. Because this Brahmin will go to anybody's house and say that I am Brahmin and you give me shelter, you give me food, you give me money. And the social pressure was such that it was very difficult to avoid them. Well, anything can become bad if it gets too much. Then there was a system of prayaschitta. Prayaschitta is kind of penance you do so that you will be freedom of your sin. If you have committed certain sin, for example, if you have eaten something which is forbidden by your caste, then you do prayaschitta, that is penance. That means maintaining fast for few days, donating certain money to the Brahmin, going to the temple, and that is believed to be freeing you from sin. For example, Raghunath Rao Peshwa, we have studied that he was instrumental in killing his own nephew Narayan Rao, and later on he much later, after the second battle, second Anglo-Maratha war, he does prayaschitta, he does some penance, accept his mistake, and then it is believed that he was freed from that sin. Do you have any class, by the way, at 11:30? Somebody else is taking class? Yes. Otherwise, I will continue.
Excuse me, sir.
Okay. Yes.
Sir, I have to leave class.
Okay. Those who have to do, they can leave. Otherwise, we will continue. Okay,
Sir,
fine. Okay, no problem. Next important dimension of the society is about festivals. So we have different festivals like Ganesh Puja, which is still continuing in Maharashtra. Then Dashera. Dashera, on the day of the Dashera, the Marathas, they generally worship their weapon. And after Dashera, the expedition begin. They started their expedition against the enemy territory. Diwali is one of the important function, and we know I am not going to describe it. The lamps are lit and there will be feast and all that. We all know that still continues. Sankrant was another important festival. Holi, Vasanta Panchami, the Holi is born, it is still done, and the people play with the color. And then Varsha Pratipada, Gudi Padwa is, the Hindus, they hoist the gudi, on the bamboo pole. They will put a colorful cloth, and on the top of that they will put a pot, and that was believed to be welcoming Rama when he came back to Ayodhya after killing of Ravana. And it is generally Gudi Padwa, which is generally celebrated in the month of April. It is generally on the day of Gudi Padwa that the Maratha army who went on expedition after Dashera, that generally falls in the month of October, and after 3-4 months of expedition during the month of April, around around 5-6 months of expedition. Around the month of April, they will come back to their own villages. But that was, I mean, it was not happening in all the cases. If the expedition is small, definitely you can come back in 5-6 months. But there are certain expedition like northern India and the far off territory like Hyder. It used to take years together, and the Maratha army, they continued to stay far away places. But it was earlier, when the Maratha empire was not very big. The expedition will start in October after Dashera, and in the month of April, during the time of the Gudi Padwa, it will come back to their own place. Now, another important thing that we should discuss about society is life of women. The life woman was, in generally speaking, in all the tradition, woman is always considered as a secondary, given a secondary place in comparison to the men. They had no freedom, and it was further curtailed with the Muslim invasion, because the Muslim army, when they came, mostly comprising of the men, and they were looking for the suitable woman to get married, and there was a lot of abduction and forceful marriage. So the Hindus, they again retreated into their own cocoon, and tried to protect their girls by marrying them off early, because it was believed that unmarried girl attracts the people, and the girl is married and having a children, probably she could be safe. And there was a further curtailment of the freedom. She was kept more confined to the home. There was no system of systematic education to the girl, but we do get evidences that the women of royal family, they did acquire certain education, and there were certain royal women like Tarabai before Peshwa's period, and Ahilyabai and Umabai Dabade. They lead an expedition. In fact, they fought in the war, so they were trained in the administration and warfare. Ahilyabai Holkar, he very efficiently ran the administration. There used to be child marriage, and generally a boy at the age of 14 maximum, and the girl maximum at the age of 8 should get married. That was generally believed. And if the girl crosses the age of 8 and become 19 years old, that generally used to give a lot of tension to the family. Oh, my daughter is yet to be married. For example, Nana Sahib Peshwa, his first marriage, he got married at the age of 10, and his wife was only 5 years old. There was a Bal Vivaha system, and many times because of the war, these men used to die in the war, and this girl used to become widow at a very young age. And the life of this child widow was very torturous life, because she was not allowed to get married, especially in the Brahmin caste. There are evidences that in other castes the remarriages used to take place, but especially from the Brahmin caste, the marriages used to not. There was no system of second marriage. If she becomes widow, let us say if a girl got married at the age of 5, and at the age of 6 she becomes widow. If her husband dies for any reason, she has to remain lead the life of a widow for the rest of her life. And the life of widow was pretty bad. There was a trouncing of head to make her unattractive, and there were a lot of restrictions on her food and the dress that she used to wear. And as a result, to escape that kind of torturous life, many women used to go sati, prefer to become sati, that is to burn themselves with the dead body of their husband. We'll be discussing that. Let us come to the marriage system. There was a Visham Vivaha, that is, Bal Zarat Vivaha, that is, the groom is of very elderly age, and the girl is of very young age. There will be a lot of differences between the age of the groom and bride in many cases. For example, and because of that, many times there are occasions that girl is not, 5-6-year-old girl, 7-8-year-old girl, she was not prepared for physical relationship. And there are incidences, large number of incidences, that if the boy is matured enough, a grown up man, if he's marrying a young girl, during the time of the physical relationship, the girl used to die because of, all that excessive bleeding and all, and that continued for a very long period. Even during the period of Tilak also, that continued. For example, how this marriage differences, there are certain evidences. Nana Sahib Peshwa, his first marriage was when he was 10 and his wife was 5 years, but he also got married at the age of 40, and at that time his second wife was only 9 years old. Similarly, Nana Fadnavis, he had number of wives, and he died at the age of 67, and at that time one of his wife was only 9 years old. So that kind of differences in the age was prevalent. It was considered as a common practice. The polygamy was prevalent among the upper strata generally. For example, Chhatrapati Shahu, he had 4 wives. Nana Fadnavis, he had 6 wives. And apart from this legally married wife, according to Hindu rituals, there was also system of taking a wife without any ritual, and that wife is generally referred as Angavastra. And there is a very derogatory word that is used for this kind of woman, that is a woman who stays with a man without being legally or without being married to the person called Rakhel. I'm sorry, don't let it hurt you. That is a very derogatory term, but that was unfortunately the part of the society, and it is still, if the affluent people many times they have apart from their legally and socially accepted wife, another woman in their life. Well, whatever you may call it now. So because of, as a man was having number of wives apart from this kind of angavastra outside, the life of the woman was generally neglected. The person cannot give such a love and affection if you have number of women in your life. If you are confined to one woman, probably the relationship will improve and the woman can claim equal right of at least to the love and affection. That is the reason we don't get evidences of having a very loving relationship between husband and wife. Of course, Bajirao loved his mistress Mastani, but those are the rare cases. There are no evidences. So life of woman was obviously not very important. She was considered as a kind of who is there to please her man, to please her husband, and to work in house. There was a prevalence of dowry as well. The dowry was paid by the bridegroom's father. Well, now there are certain cases of intercaste marriage. So the intercaste marriage is generally forbidden by the Smriti, by the tradition, but nevertheless, the rules and regulation that is imposed on the human behavior cannot always work, and there used to be intercaste marriages that used to take place, and that child generally out of this intercaste marriage or out of this intercaste alliance usually took the caste of his father. But these half caste children, they were referred as Kadu. And the position of the Kadu over a period of time becomes better in the society if he becomes affluent because of his own effort, and then later on he is accepted in the society. But of course, there is an opposition. For example, Bajirao Peshwa was Brahmin, but his mistress Mastani was Muslim. And when he wanted that his son to be brought up as a Brahmin, he should be the Upan and Sanskara should be carried out. There was a lot of opposition from the Brahmin of Pune, and finally it could not be done. There were cases of divorce also. For example, if a husband goes on war expedition and if his wife back at home indulges into the kind of extramarital relation, and if that has been found out, generally she is divorced. And then, in that case, she is neither accepted in the father's family, neither she can stay with her husband. So she is generally, forced to take to the profession like prostitution. And the divorce is also done in case the caste is hidden. If the girl is married off by hiding her caste, and later on it is being found out that she doesn't belong to the caste act she told, she is being given divorce. There was a system of widow remarriages, not among the Brahmin, but it was prevalent among the other castes. And that is called Pat. In Marathi, it is called Pat Lavne. Pat Lavne means you are taking another woman as a wife who is a widow or who is divorced. So after divorce or after widowhood, but that was not considered as respectable as the first marriage, legally and sanctioned by the religious tradition. And in case of Pat, that is a man is marrying a widow or a divorcee, generally the children of the first marriage is taken accepted by the new husband. Then there was a system of Keshapan, which I have already referred to, that is trouncing of the head of a widow. If a woman becomes widow, mostly this is done among the Brahmin and then among the Sonar caste. Actually, thing is that, somehow putting a lot of restriction on the woman was considered as a matter of prestige. That was a kind of peculiar psychology. So if a woman of your house, becomes sati, that will increase the prestige of your family. If a woman of your house is a widow and you put a lot of restriction on her, trounce her head and don't allow her to go out of house. She has to wear white clothes. That is considered as a matter of prestige. Men used to boast about that. There is a lady in my house, maybe my bhabhi or maybe my auntie, maybe my chachi, who is a widow and she lives very pious wife. She trounces her head and spends all her life only praying and praying and praying. The woman, my uncle's wife, when my uncle have died, my uncle's wife have become sati. She burned herself on the with the dead body of my uncle, and that was being boasted upon. So as the Brahmins were doing this, there were many castes who started copying this practice in order to become more prestigious in the eyes of the society, or becoming more prestigious in the eyes of his caste community. Well, so there were a lot of restrictions that is put on the widow, which I have already told. And there was a very systematic brainwashing of that girl. That girl is used to made believe that she is going sati, becoming dying with her husband, or leading the life of a pious widow with no desire, but trouncing her head, making her ugly looking as good as she can do, and spending her life only in prayer. That will liberate the family of her father-in-law as well as her own family. So spending life in the devotion to husband during his lifetime as well as after his death was considered as a very auspicious act. And that young girl who is married off at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, what does she understand about the relationship? What does she understand about the husband? But she is made to believe that if she goes sati, the whole family is liberated. Whole family is elevated in the eyes of the tradition. So she is doing. She was made. She was convinced that it is her duty, and she used to do it, suppressing her desire and living a life of celibacy. And if a widow is found to having a relationship, illicit relationship, which is considered as, then she is punished, like imprisonment, or she is being discarded by family, and again she has to take left with no option but to lead the life of prostitution, or she is being imprisoned in the forts. If she is expelled, she has to either to take to the prostitution, or if she is good looking, some other man will take her as his second wife, and again she will become as a angavastra, that is Rakhel I told you earlier. Now let us talk about sati. As this is already told, the life of widow was very torturous. Many women prepared to die along with the dead body of her husband, and that is in fact encouraged by the family member from both sides, in-laws and parent side as well. And we have evidences that Chhatrapati Shahu's wife, she goes sati, burns herself with the dead body of her husband. And then wife of Madhavrao Peshwe, the first Madhavrao, he dies, and his wife Rama, she also goes sati. In Theur, where he dies, there is a temple, Sati temple, and the places where this Rama becomes sati. Khanderao Holkar, when he dies, he had number of wives, including two Muslim wives. And when he dies, his wife Ahilyabai, she prepares to go sati, but then her father-in-law, he requests her, he urges her not to go sati. Yes, my son is no more. You are like my son, and she agrees. She doesn't burn herself, and later on she runs the administration of Holkar Saranjam, Holkar's estate very effectively. But interestingly, Khanderao's two Muslim wives, they go sati with Khanderao, and this is a very rare example of Muslim women becoming sati, burning themselves along with their dead Hindu husband. Well, now this sati practice earlier it started with Kshatriya, but then it percolated to the many people. For example, Holkar were not, they were Dhangar, but they became Kshatriya because of their profession. Then apart from in the wife of woman, there are these two things also we must touch upon, that is Natak Shala and Tamasha. So there are we have talked about prostitution and all that. So there are certain women who were not from a very traditional respectable family. Maybe the girl that is born to the prostitute, or maybe the girl that is born to the Angavastra, that is Rakhel. Many times these women were trained in the art like dancing and singing and entertaining the royalty. So these many Peshwas and many royal people, they kept these women in their house, or in their territory, having a separate house for them, and they were generally referred as Natak Shala. So this Natak Shala, initially they were generally kept for performing dancing in front of the noble and entertaining them. and some of them were also, kept as their wives, though not wedded, but their relation was like husband and wife. Like Raghunath Rao had number of Natak again they were Angavastra or Rakhel, and Daulat Rao Shinde had number of them, Natak, and there was a system of tamasha also. So in case of tamasha also, these girls are trained to dance and entertain the royalty, entertain the people. Many of these tamashas, it was like a kind of huge establishment maintained by the people, and this tamasha used to accompanying the Maratha army and entertain the royalty as well as to the soldier, and for that they are paid by these people. Mastani was one of such lady who was a dancer, but Bajirao fell in love with her, and then later on he asked her to leave all that dancing for everybody. But he was like a concubine, Angavastra of Bajirao Peshwa. Though not legally married, she lived like a wife of Bajirao Peshwa. Then there was also system of Murali and Devdasi. Murali and Devdasi were the girls who were believed to be given to God. They were not married to any man, and they used to stay in temple, work for the temple. But as this girl, they came of age, as they became young, they were suspected. They were suspect to the exploitation, and there was a lot of exploitation of these girls under the disguise of religion, like Murali and Devdasi. Let us talk about slavery during Peshwa's period now. Slavery was not very prevalent, but then we do get references to the people like Kunbi, Kunbin, and Batkin. So these were the slave. Kunbi was the slave man, and Kunbin and Batkin were the slave women who were brought and sold. And mostly it was in case of women, and the price of women was generally dependent on her beauty and quality. We can understand that as she is paid more for her beauty and youth, she is also exploited by the owner. Uh, so many royal, they own these hundreds of women, and many times these beautiful Dasi and Batkin were also gifted to another royalty by one royalty. The slave market was generally regulated by the government, and care was taken. Peshwa, they took the care that if a slave woman have her children, that child is not separated from her. He or she will generally go along with her mother. Slave can also purchase his freedom. Slavery was not very torturous, of course, that is being recorded. Slave can also marry a man slave, and women slave also can marry. The slave under Peshwa were generally happy, they were well paid, and they were given gift on the festive occasion. One another important dimension of society was pilgrimage system. There was a traditional belief that if you go to the important pilgrimage center like Kashi, Mathura, Ayodhya, Gaya, you are liberated from the sin. But all those Kashi, Mathura, Ayodhya, Gaya were in northern India, and generally they were under the control of the Muslim ruler. So it was not very safe for the many people to travel from Maharashtra to such a huge, such a long place for the commoner. But there are member of royal family. They, if as the Maratha became supreme later on, Bajirao Peshwa's mother, Radhabai, in 1736, she went on pilgrimage to Kashi, and she traveled all over northern India. And Bajirao, he sent later to all the North Indian ruler, like ruler of Jaipur and ruler of Malwa, that the good care of my mother should be taken. And she was obviously taken good care. She comes back. Even I'm forgetting the name of that ruler of Allahabad, who was in fact Muslim ruler, and he was defeated by Bajirao, Muhammad Khan Bangash. And he took good care that Bajirao's mother goes very safely through his territory. And he, in fact, called Bajirao's mother is like my own mother. So it was a quite complex system. Then later on, during 1746, Nana Sahib Peshwa's mother, that is Kashibai, she also went to Kashi. But when this royalty used to go for pilgrimage, adequate care was taken for their safety and security. So many commoners also used to accompany them and perform their pilgrimage. In Maharashtra, there were a number of pilgrimage centers like Pandharpur, Paitan, Nashik, and there was a system of prevalence of Narmada Parikrama. Then Goda Parikrama. Goda is a river. You go around that river and visit the place of pilgrimage around that river. Then Narmada Parikrama is still prevalent. Many people go for Narmada Parikrama. Then Dwadasha Jyotirlinga. There are 12 Jyotirlinga which people prefer to visit. And Puri was also an important pilgrimage center. And people who coming back from the pilgrimage, they were generally welcome. There used to be celebration, and feast was given to the Brahmin, and donation was given. Now, Dresses also important part of the social structure. So what kind of dresses were generally worn by the women? The upper garment of the woman was known as choli or polka, and the lugda was that is worn below the waist. So I'll show you the photo. Of course, we are staying in Maharashtra, so you are familiar with this kind of traditional dresses of women. This is how the Nowari, it is a 9 hand length sari which is worn by the woman, and upper garment is polka. Uh, uh, are you able to see the picture?
Yes, sir.
Well, well, and the unmarried girl generally, the dress of unmarried girl, it comprises of, polka is a upper garment and parkar is a lower garment. That is generally worn by the Maharashtrian girls before their marriage, and after marriage, of course, that lubda and choli. And this is a dress of the men, that is, dhoti, and this is called angarkha, and on the top of it there is a feta, and this is the uparne, which is kept on the shoulder. So that is the general traditional dress of the Maharashtrian men. And so men generally they had feta, angarkha, dhotar, uparne, and feta is considered as a mark of respect. So if the Chhatrapati or Peshwa, if they want to honor somebody for their exceptional bravery or exceptional work, they will generally give feta or themselves tie it around their head. Feta is a headgear, head garment. Apart from this feta, there were pagdi and topi is also used. I'll show you the picture of pagdi. And pagdi also, this is a pagdi, different types of pagdi. There was a Shinde Shahi pagdi and a Puneri pagdi. That kind of pagdis also came in the prevalent. People used to wear that. The famous places of dhoti manufacturing were Maheshwar, Paithan, Chandwad, Asti, Solapur, and Paithani is that woman's garment, lugda I showed you. Paithani that is produced at Paithan was very famous, and Paithan was also famous for manufacturing of dhoti. Now the last part, that is, let us talk about education, and that will be over in 5-6 minutes. So please bear with me. The class has become very long. Well, now the education, there was no system of education as we have now, but most of the men they were trained in warfare. So that is a tradition they have carried over from the Maratha War of Independence, where every house used to train their young man to fight against the invading enemy. So horse riding, bodybuilding, handling of weapon for the boys, they learn from childhood, and they learn to handle spear, sword. Spear, as I already told you, that spear was a very important weapon. Spear, sword, bow and arrow, gun. Danpatta is a 2-edged long sword. Bichwa was also one of the important weapon. So they learn to handle these. Talim was a kind of gymnasium which was there in the different places in villages, as well as the rich people. They had their own talim, that is their own gymnasium, where their own sons they were taught to wrestle. They used to build their body, and they were also taught handling of the different weapon. At a different annual fair at different places, the wrestling bout used to take place, and among the Peshwas like Nana Sahib, Bhau Sahib, and Raghunath Rao, they were very fond of wrestling, and they used to patronize the wrestler. Writing and reading and keeping accounts was another type of education, but very few people used to take up that. And apart from that, there was a religious education which was given in the temples and monasteries, and some scholar they gave it at their home. Pune, Paithan, Vai, Kolhapur, Nashik, they were very well-known center of the religious learning related to Vedas and Hinduism. Scriptures were copied, and the copiers were paid by this royalty like Peshwas and other Maratha Sardar. And Peshwa, they had many scriptures copied for them. Peshwe, they patronized many scholars like Mathura Bhatt and Ugradev from Kashi, Tatya Chandra from Bareilly, Raghavacharya, Krishnamacharya, and Venkatram Shastri. These were the important scholars patronized by Peshwa. And common people, generally, they got religious knowledge through Katha and Kirtan. Katha, now also it does take place when the learned man in that scripture will explain some of the text or narrate the stories and then the moral lesson. Kirtana is when you sing that is Kirtana. Stories from the scripture like Ramayana and Mahabharata were organized at the different places, and that was the means through which this education of the people was carried out. So we have studied since beginning how the caste factor was an important, how the Watan have intensified the caste conflict, and then the conflict between the Marathas and the Brahmins, the different subcastes between the Brahmin. We have discussed about the different samskara. Then we have discussed about the superstitious. We have discussed about the life of woman, like the widow and the sati and the trouncing of head. And then we have discussed about the dresses. We have discussed about the pilgrimage, and then we have discussed about the system of education that is mostly the related to the war. So this is where we end today's class. If you have any doubt, you can ask me.